Thank you. Thank you, and thank you. Okay, so I've got the assignments for next time up on the board here, right? It's also on the syllabus. I know this kind of looks like a lot to read, but all of this put together is still less than 20 pages, right? So it's not, like you're mostly only reading small parts of these essays, or the essays themselves are quite short, at least the portions we have in the anthology. Also, I want everybody to keep in mind that the first vocabulary quiz is going to open up on Friday morning in Georgia View. I will email you, at least this time, to let you know that it's opened up. And you will need to complete it by Sunday at midnight. And remember as well to find 3 timeline items for the Victorian period for Monday as well, right? So 3 landmarks of Victorian aesthetics that we can put on our timeline. So does anybody have any questions about anything before I start? I'll give you a minute to think.
We're doing romantic era of the homework, right?
No, we're going to be doing Victorian aesthetics next time. So you're going to need the pink volume for that, right?
Okay.
We'll go back to this one later.
Okay.
But yeah, so for next time, yeah, these are all going to be in the in volume E.
Okay.
Okay.
But it's just the syllabus says romantic era aesthetics, and then it has those lists.
Okay, so what it has down for homework is always what I expect you to have read for next time, right? Let me see what you're looking at.
Yeah, right, that's what I'm saying. That's why I was
Okay.
confused, because you said Nate.
Oh yeah, that's because this is what we're talking about today.
Okay, okay, I got
And then
you.
the homework for next time is what's
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I was following right.
Yeah.
I was just a little confused.
Okay, just quickly with the vocab quizzes as well. Remember that what I'm expecting from you is a definition of the term, right, along with at least one text to which it's relevant and the author of that text, right? There will be 10 of them. It will be open book and open notes, right? And it's not going to be timed. So, you can open this, I think once you open it, you have to finish it. So make sure you have all your stuff in front of you. You're not gonna. It's not gonna be. You remember or you don't kind of thing, right? Okay. The music I was playing today was Iron Maiden's interpretation of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Partly because I just freaking love Iron Maiden, but. Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. We won't actually be reading it this semester, but we read another Coleridge poem for today, Frost at Midnight. And the Maiden interpretation, it's just kind of like the Spark Notes reading of the song with an 8-minute bass solo stuck in the middle. But for some reason, heavy metal bands really like early 19th century, late 18th century romantic poetry. So, that's something we may get around to talking about why that is. But let's start with your reaction to the poems that you read for today. What did you think of these poems? How did these go for you? Was there anything that gave you trouble with them, or that you found confusing, or?
Unravished was very confusing to understand.
Okay.
But I'm not even going to lie. I read this as we're supposed to read all of this yesterday, and all of these, including the homework for on Monday, they were supposed to read. So I kind of annotated all of that, so I don't really remember all of what we read that we were supposed to read.
Okay, so for today, right, was Tintern, Abbey,
Yeah.
Frost at Midnight, and Ode on a Grecian Urn. Okay. So what did you find confusing about Ode on a Grecian Urn? Maybe we start there.
It's only kind of depressing.
Okay, what's depressing about it?
There's a strong theme of like mortality in there.
Okay.
Like, especially like near the end, he starts talking about how this urn is going to outlast him.
Uh-huh.
We were talking about like sacrifice.
Okay, yeah. There's a definite kind of change in tone about halfway through, right? Although it's not as dramatic a change in tone as it might at first appear if we're paying attention. So let's go there, and let's just try to work our way through stanza by stanza and see where we get with this, right? And then see how we can apply it to larger things that we're working on here. So can I get a volunteer to read the first stanza here? Page 979.
Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape, of deities or mortals or of both, in Tempe or goddess or the dales of Arcady?
Mm-hmm.
What men or gods are these? What maidens loathe, what mad pursuit, what struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels, what wild ecstasy?
Okay, thank you. So, the still unravished bride, who or what is the still unravished bride of quietness?
The urn?
Yeah, he's talking directly to the urn here, right? So this is a kind of conversation poem.
We did an analysis of this poem in a class I had earlier today.
Oh, okay. So this is your second time through this one.
Yeah.
What was the other class?
Research and writing with Dr. Russell.
Oh, okay. Jesse's take on it might be a little bit different from mine. Jesse's a weird dude, but okay. So thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time. What words do we already notice, or what concepts do we notice already repeating here? Yeah, quietness and silence, right?
He's very questioning.
Okay, what's questioning about this? I mean, he is asking a lot of questions in the second half of the stanza, right? So we start with quietness, silence, and slow time, right? And then what do we have in the second half of the stanza?
What men are gods are these, what men lodge, what mad pursue, what struggle to escape, what pipes and temples, what wild ecstasy.
Okay, so how do we balance that against the beginning of the stanza then, right? What's the difference in tone between the beginning and the end of the stanza?
The end of the stanza is more questioning.
Okay, more questioning, yes.
Sounds kind of, that's just
Okay, why angry? What suggests anger to you, Jess?
I'm an overthinker, so I just read into things way too much.
No, but hey, this is an enterprise that benefits overthinkers, right? So
he sounds like in Tempe or the Dales of Arcady, like,
mm-hmm.
he sounds like he's getting more angry when he speaks like this, and what men are God are used, what made him walk, like that sounds kind of angry.
Okay.
And then what mad pursuit, and then
Mm-hmm.
what struggle to escape, and what pipes and timbrels, what wild ecstasy.
You mean like frustrated because he's not getting answers? Is that
Yes.
okay?
When we discussed it in Dr. Russell's class, he said that it actually seemed to him like he was sort of relishing in the mystery of it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? It is a set of questions he's not going to get answers to, right?
Yeah.
That's a big part of what's going on here in the poem, is that he's never going to know the answers to any of these questions. But what we've got with the struggle, the mad pursuit, the pipes and timbrels, right? We're moving from silence and slow time, right, to motion and noise. But because this is a painting on the urn, on an urn, right? What's weird about the movement and the noise?
Because
because
it's
it's-
silent and quiet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's a representation of movement and noise, right? That is itself still and quiet. And I think that's a big part of what we get in the second stanza here, right? Can I get somebody to start reading from Heard Melodies Are Sweet?
Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Their joy soft pipe play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared. Pipe to the spirit, ditties of no tone. Fair
Mhm.
youth beneath the trees, thou canst not leave. Thy song nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never canst thou kiss. Though winning near the goal, yet do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair.
So, if we're looking at what's going on in this, we've got two images here, right? We've got one image of a piper, right, playing his little oaten flute, and another image of a pair of lovers beneath a tree, right? And what is Keats pointing out about both of these images, or these sets of figures?
In the end, he is saying that love does not fade.
Okay, why would you say love does not fade?
Because he said, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss.
Uh-huh.
Wilt thou love, and she be favored.
Uh-huh.
Being fair would mean not breaking that love.
Okay.
And that's just a
Well, think about fair as a sort of description of her appearance, right? What does that mean she will always be?
beautiful.
Yeah, she will always be beautiful, right? But what's never going to happen to these two? Yeah, he's never going to complete that kiss that he's in the middle of, right? The lover is leaning in, the male lover is leaning in for a kiss, but he'll never get that kiss, right? They will always be frozen in this position, in this attitude, and the action will always remain uncompleted. Right? Their love will never be consummated. But at the same time, they will always be young and beautiful. Right? The piper will continue playing his tune eternally, but no one will ever hear it. So let's take this back to that first line, thou still unravished bride of quietness. What does that mean? Why is he comparing the urn to an unravished bride?
Because
Yeah.
the music will never be heard.
Mhm.
The lovers will never get to kiss.
Yeah.
The bride will never have her groom.
Yeah.
And it'll never be complete, and it'll never finish. They'll still
Yeah.
never have a happy ending.
Exactly. Or any ending, right? Happy or unhappy. Yeah. They're just frozen in this particular moment forever. So the unravished bride of quietness, yeah, it's like, again, like a never consummated marriage, right? Can I get somebody to read stanza 3 for us, please?
Ah, happy, happy vows that cannot shed your rays, nor ever forever bid spring adieu, and happy melodists unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion for above, far above, that leaves a heart high, sorrowful, and coy,
Mm-hmm.
a burning forehead and a parching tongue.
So I think, yeah, there's a real change of tone here between the beginning and the end of the stanza, right? So what do we have here at the beginning?
The happy couple.
Yeah, the happy couple, and we got the happy bows here. The bows refer to what?
The marriage.
What's about? Do you remember the old nursery rhyme, you know, rock-a-bye baby on the treetop? Yeah, branches. The boughs are tree branches, yeah.
Also bad.
So you've got these happy, happy boughs, these happy tree branches that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, right?
They'll never be able to blossom.
They'll never be able to blossom, yes. But they will also never shed their leaves in the autumn, right? No blossom, but also no shedding, right? And what do we, like, what other ideas do we associate with the season of spring? Okay, yeah, new growth, right?
Like babies, like reproduction.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we, yes, you know, maybe it is the lustful season, right?
I don't know like animals, but okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Animals too, yeah.
Oh, we went that route?
Yeah. And we also associate it with youth, right?
Yeah.
Right, you know, it's you know, the year in the spring is still young, and you're coming out of winter, and everything is starting to unfreeze and loosen up and start to move again, right? And yet here, we're still frozen, right? An eternal spring featuring a bunch of still figures who never change their positions, right? So the whole poem is built on kind of unpacking this illusion of motion, right? And thinking about what it means that we have this suggestion of movement that never actually goes anywhere or reaches completion, right? So what this is, by the way, what we call a poem like this, right, it's an example of ekphrasis. E-K-P-H-R-A-S-I-S, if you cannot read my chicken scratch handwriting. And ekphrasis is essentially, it's literature that uses the visual arts as its primary subject or material, right? So it's literature that is about visual arts. And Keat seems to be particularly interested in the way the visual arts freeze particular moments in time. Now, I don't usually like to get too biographical when reading any particular writer. I am not of the opinion that all writing is a form of autobiography and that we're all just that all writers are just pouring their own lives out onto paper, right? In fact, generally, if I see too much of this in your own work, my comment will be something like, I don't give a shit about biography, right?
Valid.
But I think that there is something relevant going on in Keats's biography to a lot of what we're seeing in this poem, right? So we remember maybe from last time how old Keats was when he died. Yeah, he was 25 when he died. And he writes this poem very near to the end of his short life, right? Oh yeah, he was dying of tuberculosis for a couple of. Tuberculosis is not a quick killer, right? Tuberculosis is pretty slow overall, and he was qualified as a medical doctor, so he knew full well exactly what was happening to him and what he could expect, right? So. A poem that meditates on the possibility of freezing time, right? That also meditates on possibilities cut off and cut short. Coming from a writer with that particular set of life circumstances makes a lot of sense. Now, let's think about how this looks in terms of that greater romantic lyric model, though, right? Does this seem to fit the model as easily as the other two poems? I would argue that Wordsworth and Coleridge are, like those two poems, the reason I assign them is they're basically classic greater romantic lyrics that fit that pattern extremely well. Do we have the same kind of observation, meditation, application pattern here?
It's not the same, but it's implied. Because
Okay.
It observes on the playing and the lovers and the music and how it'll never come to you.
Mhm.
Then the meditation, he doesn't really meditate on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like he meditates on it. He just kind of goes to application gathering. It'll never happen. Oh well, that's just how it goes.
Yeah, whatever meditation happens in this poem seems to be pretty brief, right? There's a lot of observation, and I think that where the meditation is kind of mixed in with the observation, right? Rather than a separate phase where, looking at the object spurs his reverie, right? Triggers his thought process. He's thinking as he's observing, right? And he is having a kind of conversation with the urn, which of course has to be, to some extent, a one-sided conversation, because an inanimate object can't answer you back. And this is actually something I'm curious to know about from your earlier class, right? The line that trips critics up about this poem is at the end here. Or if we look at the last stanza, right? "O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought as doth eternity. Cold pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know." And the question that a lot of people ask about this poem is who speaks those lines that are in quotation marks? Is it the speaker in the poem, or is it the urn answering him back?
I kind of figure it's the urn.
Okay, why do you think it's the urn, Alex?
Because it seems like that would be like an accurate reflection of the thoughts that the thinking about the urn would give Keats.
Okay.
I don't know. It didn't give it much thought.
So it sounds to you more like a response.
Yeah.
And if it is a response, right, beauty is truth, truth, beauty. Then what does that mean?
Basically that. It's basically, it's pretty much the kind of the basis for like aesthetic. Not kind of like it's just picture definition aestheticism, really.
Yeah, and we haven't got to aestheticism yet. We'll talk about aestheticism next time, because that's really more kind of Victorian era philosophy. But we see, this kind of setting up some of the groundwork for that, right? Now let's also try and remember what Keats's basic theoretical orientation here was. Or does anybody remember when we talked last time about negative capability and what that meant?
Yeah. Basically the ability to just sort of let the like flow through you and not think about it too much, not need to doubt it or just let things happen.
Yeah, it's about being receptive, right? It's about being receptive to sense impressions without necessarily trying to make meaning out of them right away, right? So his whole theory of art is based on a notion of receptivity. So one might read, the beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know lines, as a kind of rebuke to his attempts to force some kind of meaning out of this, right? All this urn needs to do, its only purpose as a work of art, is to be beautiful, right? And that's its truth. You don't need to find a deeper meaning in it. Just let the beauty of it wash over you. Just enjoy it and appreciate it.
It's just a frickin' urn.
Although, at the same time, right, it may be just a frickin' urn, right? But it's also an exquisitely beautiful art object that has survived down through the centuries, right?
Yeah, his ash is gonna go in them too.
What's that?
His ashes are gonna go in that urn.
Yeah, that was dark. But I think, he is connecting the kind of the eternity of the urn, right, with his own mortality. And, pardon?
Because he's fixing it up.
Yeah. And his mortal human frame, right, is not going to outlast him, right, the way this urn is going to just go on and on and on, completely unchanging. So I think that where we get, this is probably the closest thing we get to application in the poem, right? Where, his meditation on the urn leads him to this, okay, maybe all I need to think about here, right? Maybe all we need to consider is that the urn is beautiful, right? That's it, that's enough. Now, Keats is, as we noted last time, coming along a good bit later than Wordsworth and Coleridge. So his concerns and his starting point are also quite a bit different from theirs, right? So if we look at Tintern Abbey and at Frost at Midnight, right? What are Wordsworth and Coleridge starting their observations with? What are they looking at? Let's start with Tintern Abbey. Which begins on page 299. And let me just kind of give you a little bit of background about this poem and about the place that Wordsworth is talking about and his relationship to it. So, Tintern Abbey is a ruined medieval abbey along the Wye River Valley. And the Wye is a river that kind of runs along the southern, like the southwestern border between England and Wales, right? So parts of the valley, so half the valley is in England, half of it's in Wales, depending on which bank you're standing on. So, let me see. Okay, here we go. If we're looking at a map of England and Wales, the Wye River Valley is along here. And the walking tour that Wordsworth is taking starts around here and ends at Shepstow Castle. So this was actually a well-known tourist route, right? This is not like a lonely forest walk that he discovers on his own and is just taking all by himself for shits and giggles, right? This was a popular tourist pastime, and there was a set itinerary. So it started at the village of Ross-on-Wye, and this is around about what that village would have looked like in 1798. Right, from there, you observed Goodrich Castle, which is in about the same condition in 2021 that it was in 1798. Then, the ironworks at New Weir, which seems a weird thing to look at in a nature walk, right? But we'll talk more about that in a minute. The village of Simon's Yat along the river. Let's make this a little bigger. The city of Monmouth, which was famous for its medieval bridge. Tintern Abbey nearby. Piercefield House, which is a stately home. And finally, Shepstow Castle. Now, in Wordsworth's poem, he makes it appear almost as though he and his sister are the only people there, right? The only people present. This is not what it actually would have been like. Right. So, two things we see here. One, there was a lot of industry along the River Wye. So we've got a lot of factories belching smoke up into the air, right? Plus, because it was a popular tourist walk, there would be people walking along the river, there would be people in boats going up and down the river, right? So it actually would have been a quite crowded place. But Wordsworth is trying to work out some things to do with artistic theory here, right? So one influence here is the idea of the sublime and the beautiful that was proposed by the Irish philosopher and politician Edmund Burke. Are any of you familiar with these terms, sublime and beautiful, in this kind of context? Does this ring a bell with anybody?
I think, I'm trying to remember, Dr. Russell gave a definition of the word sublime
Okay.
in this context. I think he said like jarringly, basically shocking.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad way to put it together. The sublime is like the
He
aesthetic.
specifically said it blows your mind.
Yeah, the aesthetics of shock and of awe, right? So something that's beautiful excites desire. Right? Something that's beautiful is usually small, symmetrical, and is the kind of thing that you can imagine possessing, right? It's small enough that your mind can take it in and encompass it. The sublime is that which excites awe or terror. It does this mostly by making you feel tiny and insignificant, right? So, have any of you ever gone out into a field in the middle of the night and just kind of looked up into the night sky and looked at all the stars and felt shockingly small and weak and insignificant? So what you experience there is the sublime, right? Have you seen pictures of those enormous statues of Ramesses II in Egypt, right? They're several stories tall, and they have imposing, impassive features, right? You maybe get up to about halfway up his shin, right? And it's just this giant statue looking down at you. That would also be an example of the sublime, right? It's meant to convey the power of its subjects to you. And when we're talking about the natural sublime, then we're talking about the kinds of landscapes that do that, right? Now, the problem with the sublime is that too much of it kind of makes you shit your pants in fear, right? Which for most people is not a pleasurable sensation.
Yeah.
Right? We tend not, I personally like horror movies, so, being a little scared now again is cool. But do I want to feel that all the time? Not so much, right? So, what late 18th century thinkers, like the guy who really mapped out the Wye River tour, the writer William Gilpin, who in 1782 published a book called Observations on the River Wye. I don't know why I cannot. There we go. Come up with an alternative that they call the picturesque. So the picturesque is the sublime, but mediated through some kind of frame or by distance, right? So if I'm, walking under the great flying buttresses of Tintern Abbey, right? That is awe-inspiring and perhaps a little frightening. However, if I am standing on a path several miles above it and looking down at it, particularly if the trees and little cottages around it have been pruned just so, right, to give me a good view of it, then I get that feeling of awe without that feeling of terror, right? So the Wye Valley tour is set up in a lot of ways to promote this idea of the picturesque, right, as a kind of safe way to consume the sublime. And a lot of what Wordsworth is complaining about in this poem is his inability to appreciate the landscape in quite the same way the second time around, right? Tintern Abbey never gets mentioned in the poem except in the title. It just happens to be a structure that he's near. So let's just kind of go through the poem and see where it takes us. Again, I'm going to volunteer to read on page 299, starting with 5 years have passed, 5 summers in the length of 5 long winters.
5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from the mountain springs with a soft rolling murmur.
Mm-hmm.
Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs, that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts with more deep seclusion, and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The days come when I gain repose, here under the stark sycamore, and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season, with their unripe fruits, clad in one green hue, and lose themselves mid groves and
Okay, groves and copses, right? Does everybody know what a copse is? Okay, so a copse, right? Not a corpse, very different thing, right? Copse is a cluster of trees. That makes more sense, right? Yeah.
At first I read it as corpses.
Yeah, no,
That
not
was-
corpses.
that
No,
was-
no.
Anyway,
Not that kind of poem.
yeah. Anyway, once again, I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows. Little lines of sportive wood run wild. These pastoral farms, green from the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees. With some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or some hermit's cave, where by this fire the hermit sits alone.
Okay, so let's start with Wordsworth's descriptions here of landscape, right? What does this place look like the way he describes it? What elements of what features of the landscape stand out to you?
Lots of greenery.
Okay, green. There's quite a lot of green, yes, good.
The
Sounds, okay, what kinds of sounds?
water, the mountains, yeah, water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of the sound here is being produced by water, right?
Seems peaceful. Like
Okay.
It as like expressed as silent, secluded.
Uh-huh, silent and secluded, yes. Okay, good. In fact, he even, talks about a hermit in his hermitage at the end of this, right? So yeah, so this seems to be something that's set up just for him, right? Like he's the only person in it. And yet there are other signs of human activity here, right? Not just because we know that, in fact, he would probably be walking along with and past other people on this tour, and there would be other people waving from boats and shit like that, right? But there are, where do we see evidence here of human activity?
The hermit.
Well, he's imagining the hermit, right? And that would still kind of fit with the whole silent and secluded thing. Because hermits, by definition, kind of don't want to deal with other people, right?
Vagrant dwellers in houses with, is that, or is he saying?
Yeah, with some uncertain notice, as might seem, of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermits. So he's talking about hermits, the people who live alone in the woods, yeah. But he's also,
Lots of cottage ground.
yeah, cottage ground, pastoral farms, right? Right, there are little hedgerows everywhere, but they're a little bit wild and untended, right? So we seem to have here a kind of like, harmonious blend of nature and human habitation, right? Everything kind of, working together here in tandem to produce this kind of beautiful, silent, secluded green scene, right? Can I get somebody to read the next verse paragraph here, starting with these beauteous forms?
These beauteous forms,
Thank you.
through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but often lonely rooms amid the din of towns and cities I have owed to them in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart. And passing even to my pure mind with tranquil restoration, feelings too of unknown pleasure such, perhaps as no have no slight of or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love, nor less I trust that I may have owed another gift of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burden of mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affection gently is on, and to the breath of his whole frame. And even the motion of our human blood on suspended wearily to sleeping body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the eternal joy you see into the life of the
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, I know he gets as he transitions into meditation here, right?
Yeah.
Things get a little wiggy, yeah. But I think where I want to focus our attention here for the moment at least is the beginning of this verse paragraph, because I think that it actually has a lot to do with Wordsworth's overall aesthetic and with romantic aesthetics generally, right? Now, do we remember how Wordsworth defined poetry from last time?
He was into emotion and recollected and tranquility.
Yes, emotion, recollected, and tranquility. Good, yes. And that is exactly what he is talking about in this first paragraph, right? He's talking about calling up emotional responses when the objects that first excited those responses are no longer present, right? He's talking about being able to call up these sensations in his memory and then having that restore to him, some notion of what he felt in this place, right? When he first walked these paths 5 years ago, right? So at the time that Wordsworth is writing this poem, he's 27 years old. He first took this tour at the age of 22, and then spent a little bit of time in revolutionary France, and is newly returned to England and trying to figure things out, right? Now let's skip ahead a little bit to around line 58 with and now with gleams of half-extinguished thought. Can somebody read that for us?
And now with gleams of half-extinction fall, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revises again. While here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with soothing thought, and in this moment, there's life and food for future years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I dare to hope, though changed, no doubt, from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a road, I bounded o'er the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, whatever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the things he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of boyish days and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all I cannot paint than I was.
Okay, you can stop there, right? So he wants to recapture the original sensation he got from this place, right? He wants to be able to bring that back. Can he do it? No. He's not who he was then anymore, right?
Those words.
Part- Yeah, those 5 intervening years, right? Mean that he can't look on this place with the same eyes again, right? And then I want to skip further ahead since we are running out of time here. Bottom of page 301. Nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay, for thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river. Thou, my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend, and in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Has he given us any indication up to this point that there's another person here? Yeah, this is the first he's mentioned her, right? So the friend here that he's talking to is his sister Dorothy. And while he has made this tour before, she hasn't. So he's using her in the poem for a particular purpose, right? The basic idea here is that he can watch her responses to these sights and then recapture some sense of what he felt when he was here for the first time, right? So it's a way of kind of reliving memories that he can't return to. What's so funny?
I'm just imagining the dude just walking through the forest with his sister. Like I'm just imagining you thinking about this, just like just being William Wordsworth's sister, just like, oh, there he goes again. Can't take this dude anywhere.
Well, we're going to read some selections from Dorothy's journals later in the semester, and they have a really weird relationship, and a lot of it is tied to the very limited opportunities that middle-class women had in 19th century Britain. But yeah, even in this poem, right, he seems to be thinking of her mostly as a kind of extension of himself. Or it's like, okay, you are a person younger than me who hasn't done this before. So I'm just going to vicariously experience this through you because I can't get the same thrill from it anymore, right? So that's where we get to the application here, right? So we start with his observation of where he is now in the environment. We get that meditation on how he needs this kind of emotional food when he's in the cities that he gets from a place like the Wye River Valley. But he can't recapture that anymore, so he has to bring his sister along on this tour in order to do so. And this is the basic model for a romantic poem, right? This going back and forth between the outside, your inside, and the outside. So the poem is, again, primarily about thinking. Just as Ode on a Grecian Urn is also, it's not so much about the urn as it is about thinking, right? And if you get nothing else from this portion of the class, right? Just remember that Romanticism, as an artistic mode, at least in its British formulation, is almost entirely about thinking as an internal process, right? Okay, so we're about out of time because we started a little bit early. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? Okay, so let me give you the guide questions for next time. And then we will see you on Monday.